This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Welcome back. Home stretch here on Inside the Paint. Clay Ferraro here. Ira Winderman there. Make sure to smash that like button, as Big O likes to say. And also, again, you guys have been great with your questions, your comments. That really drives the show for us, so we appreciate it. We'll get to all those. We'll attempt to get to all those as the last segment rolls on, if Ira will let me. I wanted to talk about the big trades that we haven't even had a chance to get to. And the big one, I think, last week, we kind of felt it a little bit more the morning of our show. I think the momentum started to build a bit, so we were able to kind of talk about it in more certain terms, but now we can talk about it in absolutely certain terms. James Harden is a Philadelphia 76er. Ben Simmons is a member of the Brooklyn Nets. How much better did each of these teams get? And do the Heat have something to be concerned about now as far as their standing amongst the Eastern Conference contenders because of this one move?
Yes, and yes. Let's face it, the Sixers got a player for a player who wasn't playing. So that's an automatic upgrade, no matter how the fit works with James Harden, Joel Embiid or not. So that's a win for them. The Nets got a player for a player who was disinterested and basically shut it down on them. So that's a victory for them. Heck, even the Seth Curry upgrade on James Harden is a victory because it's someone who cares and will give his all and has a very unique skill set. So that's a victory for them. The thing, and I've written about this a couple of times at the Sun Sentinel, Clay, my concern is this. The Nets still don't have Kyrie Irving at home. I believe it's something like 7 of the next 8. Kyrie is not eligible to play. They have a game in Madison Square Garden. The New York vaccination rule is in effect there also. I remember back in the day that he played a New York Knicks team that was a low seed because Latrell Sprewell had missed most of the season. Allen Houston steps up, hits a shot, Heat are eliminated. If the Miami Heat were to play the fully healthy, reconfigured Brooklyn Nets in the first round, which is very much a possibility in a 1-8 or a 2-7, it's not going to be the Brooklyn Nets team we saw at FTX Arena on Saturday night. It's going to be Kevin Durant will be there. It's going to be Ben Simmons will be there. It's going to be Seth Curry will be there. And at least in Nets road games, of which there'll be 4 if they play as the lower seed, Kyrie Irving will be there. Man, I don't want anything to do with that. I'd rather almost play anyone else in the East. And I know what the listeners and those in the chat board have said. The Nets don't defend. You just need to outscore them. No. The Nets still will have the scoring of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and it'll have plenty. So I think that's where it sort of concerns me the most, is that you have a Nets team that was one thing for most of the season. And if the vaccine rule changes in New York, could be a completely different thing. It's almost, the G League has done this and some other leagues have done this. You can choose your playoff opponent. Now, of course, you anger the other teams when you choose someone as, oh, I'll take them, they get the motivation. But I can tell you this, Clay, if there was a draft of first round opponents, I think the Heat might draft otherwise than what they might wind up with. Because at number 1 or number 2, there's a good chance the Heat are either going to get the Brooklyn Nets, the Toronto Raptors, the Boston Celtics, stand right there all as possibilities. So when you look at teams like that, maybe the Atlanta Hawks with Trae Young, it's just interesting. The lower seeds in the East are not going to be cupcakes. There's going to be a lot of 6 and 7 game series, I believe, in the first round in the East this season.
It's like you're reading Kane's 1989's brain. He actually asked in the chat who are the teams that the Heat should avoid in the playoffs. I think you mentioned him. And I've come around to your line of thinking on Toronto. Now, I wasn't afraid of them before. Afraid isn't the right word. I wasn't concerned about them before. But after that game that went to triple overtime, and this goes back to what I said in the last segment, I need to see Jimmy Butler at closing time be the star that Fred VanVleet was in that game. And I've seen him do that. I've seen him make the big shots. So I need to see that. And so I think those are the teams that if you're choosing your opponent, of all the teams you just mentioned, by the way, I'm still not convinced that Boston has figured out exactly who they are. They're in a really nice stretch right now. And maybe they have. Jason Tatum more on ball. And they're obviously very, very talented. But they're still kind of putting their roster together. They're missing a lot of guys. So if you're asking what are the teams that the Heat should avoid, I think Ira just did a good job of rattling all of them off. Really quickly, not to detour too much, but Lenny joined a bit late. He's asking about Markieff Morris. So basically what's going on with that, and Ira mentioned it, is he's working out with Stanley Remy. the Heat are being really careful, it appears right now, not to have him working out with the team with their personnel working with him. So that's what you can kind of look at as fact. What I'm kind of saying as opinion is it reminds you a bit of the Chris Bosh situation in this, that sometimes you have to protect the player from themselves, and you also don't want to have liability issues right there if something were to happen. You don't want your team personnel to be the ones who inflicted, that isn't the right word, but who are the ones kind of like on watch when it happens.
Take responsibility.
So when you're asking what happened, there's a feeling that I think this was the second whiplash injury that he suffered.
Second neck injury, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a third one could be really, really bad. And so it feels like the Heat are being super cautious with this. They want every single box checked before they even want to be able to work with him. And look, in the past, they have a history of this where they do not want to be the ones that put somebody in harm's way. Okay, so the Ben Simmons addition to Brooklyn and the James Harden addition to Philadelphia. I want to go back to something you just said a few minutes ago about, people say, well, Brooklyn can't defend. Ben Simmons can. And that's where I actually said this a few months ago when all this stuff was going down. And actually, honestly, when James Harden ended up in Brooklyn in the first place, I felt like Ben Simmons was a better fit there than James Harden is and was. And that was before Ben Simmons got how to shoot a layup. But I don't think that Ben Simmons that was kind of in his own head and had problems down the stretch in playoff games, they don't need him to be that Ben Simmons. They need him to go to Brooklyn, handle the ball, find Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in spots that they like. And that's a different discussion, by the way. But he's just a guy that, like, if you have a weaker defender on him because you have to put your best defenders on Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, he can get to the basket, and he will get to the basket offensively. He's not going to sit in the corner and shoot threes. Like, you don't need him to do that. And then defensively, man, did people forget how great this guy is defensively?
He's a top 5 perimeter defender in the NBA right now.
My goodness.
So and you know what? And the underrated defender, maybe the most underrated defender among NBA stars, is Kevin Durant, who is a very, very good defender. So if Kevin Durant's going to take the Bam assignment and Ben Simmons takes the Jimmy Butler assignment, then all of a sudden Kyle Lowry has a full plate of him having to be the man, or maybe Tyler Hero if you put him in that 4-man unit also. So it does change the dynamic. Again, need to see Ben Simmons, need to see all that time off. But if on one hand, the Heat are counting on Victor Oladipo after all that time off, then it's no different than the Nets counting on Ben Simmons after all his time off. Matter of fact, Ben Simmons has played competitive basketball more recently than Victor Oladipo has.
That's a great point. Yeah, and I think the thing with Ben Simmons too is, look, chemistry matters a lot. And well, let me say this. I kind of dispelled any thoughts about whether the Heat need to be on the floor a lot together in order to develop that chemistry with the first couple of weeks of this season. I was like, you know what, that's it. With the Heat, I'm fine with it. Like, working Victor Oladipo in is not a question to me. They're going to be fine. I think it's a bit different when you're working at a Ben Simmons with Brooklyn, because he's somebody who he's going to be a more integral part of what they do if they're going to win a championship than Victor Oladipo will be for the Heat. You're expecting him to be in a bench role.
Right. You're talking about the third man versus the ninth man. Yes.
I think the thing that we saw in the Super Bowl, and I think it translates to this. Ultimately, talent wins. And, chemistry matters a lot. Nobody is dispelling that. But when Kevin Durant becomes your second best defender, as opposed to being your best defender, and you can put Kevin Durant on the second best player on the other, and Ben Simmons can get the assignment of just, man, go be a talented defender. Just go get that guy. Make sure Jimmy Butler does not get to the basket. That's the type of difference that Ben Simmons can make with this team, where before, like, if you're Brooklyn and you have James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant, and all of a sudden Jimmy Butler's getting to the paint at will, you have to make a decision. Do we force Kevin Durant to use all of his energy on the defensive end of the floor and maybe take the ball out of his hands off? It gives you so many more things that you can do. So I think Brooklyn got better. And I'm not saying that I think Ben Simmons is necessarily a better player overall than James Harden, but I think he's a much, much better fit for what Brooklyn needed
I
than
think
James
Brooklyn
Harden was.
got more betterer, as speaking as a journalist, than the Sixers did because
Agreed.
the pieces fit. I still have to
Yes.
see how James Harden plays with a dominant big man.
Yes.
The last time he played with a dominant big man, I don't know, call him a dominant big man, with Clint Capella in Houston, all they asked Clint Capella was to
Yes.
roll on the pick and roll and rim runs on the fast break. Joel Embiid's not going to be limited to that. Joel Embiid's not going to be limited to 6 shots a game. Joel, just go out and get a bunch of rebounds and score on the offensive rebounds. No, Joel Embiid is someone who has to be featured. So we'll be curious to see if James Harden can coexist with that level of talent. Never quite reached that with Chris Paul. Never quite reached that with Russell Westbrook. Never quite reached that. Although John Wall's a little different. That was a different situation. So there are a lot more questions with Philadelphia. So that'll be interesting also. So again, nothing's definitive in the East. When it comes to continuity and cohesion, I'd go with the Bucks and the Heat. They know what they are, who they are,
Yes.
how they are. They have their playoff game plan set. They already know. They can say, okay, let's just get to the end of April. We know what we want to do. It's in our playbook. The Nets still have to learn themselves. The 76ers still have to learn themselves. Chicago, with Alex Caruso coming back and Lonzo Ball, have to still relearn themselves to a degree. That's different, and that makes a difference in moments of truth. Have you been there, seen that, done it? The Heat have in the 2020 playoffs. The Bucks have in the 2021 playoffs. The Nets right now are just an illusion, just a creation, sort of like that previous Nets big three with Garnett and Pierce and Darren Williams. You have to wait to see if it's really something tangible or not. And who knows? James Harden didn't get his player opted for next year in time at the trade deadline when it had to be done within 48 hours. He could still become a free agent this summer. You just never know. If anyone is flighty in the NBA, it's James Harden.
And with Philadelphia, we know there's going to be that adjustment period, but I do think there's going to be a honeymoon period where they're doing everything they can to make it work, James Harden and Joel Embiid. And by the way, Joel Embiid, I don't think he gets enough credit for dealing with a lot of the garbage that he's dealt with in Philadelphia. Like, I mean, he's had to watch all this stuff go down, and he has been for somebody who he's just got this personality that sometimes makes you feel like, oh, he's just happy-go-lucky. He doesn't really, I don't know if you say he doesn't care as much, but man, I mean, he has been the rock there, and he obviously has the injury history, but I think he's going to work hard to make it work with James Harden, and I think vice versa, because James Harden knows what his reputation is. But 2 things. Number one, I think they're going to miss Seth Curry. I really do. I mean, that's like you're adding a James Harden, but you had somebody in Seth Curry that you talk about gravity all the time. Duncan Robinson with the Heat has that gravity that pulls defenders away. You're going to miss him. And number 2, part of this run for them where they've looked so much better of late, Tyrese Maxey is become a really, really good player on the ball. And so I think you're going to take the ball out of his hands a bit in order to, I think you can see James Harden almost taking on a bit of a point guard type role like he did with Brooklyn for a while, where Kyrie Irving was almost like the smaller shooting guard. But that takes the ball out of Tyrese Maxey's hands. And Maxey's somebody really good defender, but he's not somebody who is going to hurt you off the ball. And like you have to really account for him. He doesn't have that kind of gravity. So to your point, the pieces of this deal, you can see where they fit a lot better in Brooklyn, even if you're going to tell me, and I'm not going to argue that Philadelphia may have gotten the better talent end of the deal by adding the best player in the deal. I think the pieces fit better in Brooklyn.
But I will say this, Philadelphia, by holding out and not putting in Matisse Thybulle or Maxey in there, also protected themselves by having fallback options. So you can make an argument they have the better depth of talent than Brooklyn does right now.
And that's fair. And we're getting some more questions about Victor Oladipo, just because people hopping in late. Just a quick update on that. There is no real update. And
I wish there was.
We always joke about this, but one day Eric Spoelstra is just going to walk out and say, Vic ran through all the practice. He's going to play tomorrow night.
Or the injury report the day before a game will upgrade him to questionable, and it'll be game on. Yeah. Yeah,
that's right. But I put it this way. There's no reason to believe there's been a setback. There's nothing that like makes you, it feels to me, and again, not to aggregate, this is more like opinion. It feels to me there's an extra level of caution because last year he wanted to run back out on the floor. He wanted to impress Pat Riley. He wanted to be a member of the Miami Heat and show what he could do. This year, I think they're like, look, you're going to be a key part of this championship drive. We need you to be fully healthy. And I've always kind of circled the All-Star break and after that. If we start to get into mid to late March and there's no real update, then that's what I would start to wonder a bit more. But again, this is all personal opinion.
I already typed it in. Ferraro, Colin, he'd forced to be cautious with Oladipo. As soon as we're done, boom, it's going to be out there.
I guess, I mean, if that's the case, at least we're getting clicks and listens and
smashes.
And people smashing the like buttons, right? So a couple of questions, comments as we get to the end of the show. Canes 1989, it feels like Pat Riley wants to win a ring. That's why Oladipo hadn't come back yet. Yeah, I think look, they know the playoffs are all that matter, and I think they want to make sure he's healthy for that. Let's get out on this. Last question for Lenny, and it was what we mentioned in the crossover, the Serge Ibaka edition in Milwaukee. We got about 30 seconds. How does that change their team?
I think it just helps bridge the gap in case Brook Lopez doesn't come back from his back injury, gives them another playoff body. Serge is not the Raptors championship Ibaka, or else the Clippers would have kept him. But a nice subtle move, although I think they left them short in the backcourt by moving on from Dante DiVincenzo. But they got plenty of depth. Wes Matthews has come and played very well for them.
Which is why Goran Dragic, unfortunately, could make a lot of sense for them. We're going to keep following all of this. Next week's show will be packed as well as we get ready to hit the All-Star break. Thanks, as always, guys. This has been great. We appreciate you. Please smash that like button, and please stay tuned. The Big O Show rolls on next.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.